Hello everyone and welcome to Resplantsibility. I'm Alex Nelson and today I want to talk to you guys about a term that's thrown around a lot that might not be familiar to a lot of people. The species we're going to talk about today are silent invaders of habitats, and by their vast numbers, they can deal a pretty heavy blow to ecosystems on both small and large scales, as well as reduce native biodiversity in an area. We are of course talking about invasive species. So while this topic can be really doom and gloom at times, we're going to end on a positive note about steps we can take to ensure we're part of the solution and not contributing to the problem. So we're going to start today with a simple definition of what is an invasive species. So in essence, this is any introduced plant or animal species that does harm to native habitat in an area. And this could be in the form of just outcompeting the natives for resources or displacing them physically altogether. And so this damage can be ecological or environmental or economic in nature. So I want to start this by talking about one specific example of invasive plants in the United States, and then I'm going to show you some pictures of other common invasives that you're likely to see depending on where you live in the US. But I want to start by talking about members of the genus Tamarix. Tamarix is a genus that's native to Central and Eastern Asia, and there are many species that have been introduced into the US. But all of them are these sort of medium, multi-stemmed, deciduous shrubs. So deciduous, they lose their leaves in the wintertime. And in the summertime, they've got these really very beautiful pink flowers. And these were planted extensively as windbreaks and erosion control measures throughout the central and southwestern United States. Though planted in an effort to be beneficial to an ecosystem, it's come to light that members of the genus Tamarix disrupt native ecosystems and wildlife in many profound ways. And they do this primarily by forming monocultures in riparian areas or areas near waterways. That's the salt cedar or the Tamarix's favorite habitat. And they outcompete all of the other plant communities and therefore disrupt the animals that depend on those native plant communities. Now, it's important to note that these riparian areas are typically in unaltered habitat. These areas are areas of high productivity. So you often see many diverse species of tree and forb and grasses in these areas that provide very diverse habitats for wildlife. And you often see these areas, these riparian areas, as sort of the crux of some ecosystems, right? This is where animals get the water that they need to survive. And so by having salt cedar here, often animals can't even get to the water because of these dense thickets of invasive plant. There are a lot of removal efforts that are being attempted, but it spreads so quickly and is so hard to remove that it's really a catastrophic plant in any ecosystem. So Tamarix is just one example of an invasive plant, but there are many types of invasive plants throughout the United States. So I want to take a minute to show you guys some photos so that you can maybe familiarize yourself or potentially recognize these plants when you're out on your next walk or bike ride. Okay, so now we're getting to the part where, how do we become the solution? Now that we know about the problems of invasives, what do we do? How do we play our part? And particularly for people who aren't maybe familiar with plant ID, that can be sort of intimidating. So the first thing we can do is just educate ourselves about the invasives in our area if you don't know them already. And if you're someone who's new to identifying plants and you're not very comfortable, differentiating them, there are a couple of great resources. And one of them is from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It's their National Invasive Species Information Center. And that's a great resource. They have lists of invasives by state. So if your state has submitted a list of invasive or noxious weeds, it can be found there. Another thing you can do is when you're traveling, make sure that you're not contributing to the spread of invasives by checking your clothes or your shoes if you've been walking in an area with a lot of plants to make sure that you're not carrying any seeds. If you're camping, clean out your tent and make sure that you're not carrying debris from campsite to campsite. And another thing, if you're camping, if you're using firewood, it always helps to source your firewood from the place that you are camping so that you're not potentially carrying invasive insects like the emerald ash boring beetle from place to place, and assisting these invasive species in their ability to torment native ecosystems. And then the last thing that you can do is get involved in combating invasive species in your area. Does your city or any community groups do anything to fight invasives? Sometimes there are what they call weed warrior projects, where a bunch of volunteers get together and fight invasives. You can also be vigilant about these invasives just when you're walking your dog or riding your bike. If you see them, you can report these species on the app iNaturalist or to your city's wildlife department. So as we can see, there are so many things to be done on the solution side of this invasive species conundrum, even more than I've mentioned here. So I hope that the consideration you have for native wildlife in your area encourages you to take a few steps towards tackling these invasives. Thank you all so much for your attention and your plant compassion. If you are enjoying Resplantsibility, please subscribe and share it with your friends and neighbors. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter, Resplantsibility, and my YouTube channel will be updated with new videos every Friday. Feel free to leave questions or comments on the videos, or you can send me an email at wanderinginsearchofplants@gmail.com.